it's good. All right, now we're live. We're back on another exciting episodes. Oh wow! Look, it says Hangouts on Air is going away later this year for
I
quick
just said right. That's why I'm asking you.
streaming. Try YouTube webcam. All right, I think they just keep transforming it into something. This is the second time it's been destroyed. During the course of the Starfleet Boy series, I don't know if you remember, Doctor. We had another scare
No,
with
I
the
don't
old.
recall.
You don't even remember we were on
Remember.
another way of doing it, and then that went away, and now so we've been on phase 2 for broadcasting.
Wow, I had no idea.
I have some really, as you know, that this is a casual and informal show, so I have some really good ideas. If the Hangouts does go away, there's other ways I think of capturing this kind of interaction and then broadcasting it
Through Google?
Through something else.
You mean no more YouTube?
No, it would be YouTube, but
okay.
Instead of like using Hangouts as the
interface,
the facilitator,
uh-huh.
It would be something else like Skype, perhaps, or
Skype. Okay, there we go.
One of those things. Something, something's out there.
All right.
Either way, it won't affect Starfleet Boy. For those of you in the Romulan Star Empire who are looking to destroy Starfleet Boy.
or the Kardashians.
A communications or the Cardassians. A communications disruption will not work.
That's good to know. That is good to
know. So now that we've gotten through that, we're back on another exciting episode of Starfleet Boy, where we have a casual and informal conversation about Star Trek. And I'm so pleased to be joined by the Doctor once more. Hello, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
Public apologies. I I meant to have you on sooner this season, but we had a communications disruption. we had another kind of communications disruption called ID10T, which is the error that I made when trying to communicate with you. Are you aware of the ID10?
I am not aware of the ID
error.
No.
It's a common error. It's a user level error. And if you were to write ID10T on a piece of paper, it would spell out an English word.
Idiot.
Get off my bridge.
You idiot.
You idiot.
Imbecile.
You idiot. Doctor, do you want to... so this is a 2-part spectacular of Starfleet Boy. Because the episode was 2 parts. We're going to do part 1 and part 2 all the way through.
We're not doing one episode.
We're trying something new on Starfleet Boy. We're only going to save that for the season finale. So this has to just go all the way through. Are you with it? Are you down, Doctor? Can you do that?
But that takes away from the cliffhanger, though.
Yeah, but there's no cliffhanger on the discussion ever.
No, it takes away from the cliffhanger of the episode.
I think we can try it. We can do it. I don't know. How about this?
All right.
You're
in charge. you do whatever you want.
Do you want me to, since I'm doing something new for our show, do you want me to do the summary to set the tone, or do you want to do the summary? Can you combine both episodes 1 and 2?
Yeah.
Go do the summary. Then I implore you to do the summary, Doctor.
Okay, for both episodes.
Both episodes.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, it's pretty simple.
It is.
I'm going to do a simple summary. I'm not going to, dwell on details. But this is the one where, with that great opening, the Admiral comes aboard the Enterprise and basically tells Captain Picard, "You're no longer, you're relieved of command." And that's the blockbuster intro before the credits. And what it is the Enterprise is going to be commanded by Captain Jellicoe, played by the fantastic Ronnie Cox, whom RoboCop fans will know as Dick Jones. And Picard is relieved of command because he's going to be transferred to a special mission with Crusher and Worf showing off some new commando fatigues.
You have
before.
the figure. Of course, you have the figure.
Of
The
course,
figures. That's
of
awesome.
course. So, anyways, so they're on a special commando mission behind enemy lines, Cardassian lines, to be specific. And Jellicoe is in command of the Enterprise because of his previous experience with the Cardassians. And the 2 episodes follow an A-B plot. The A plot is Picard infiltrating this base, and it turns out it's a trap. It's a trap for him, and he is captured. And his keeper is, I forget, he's Gull something. I forget who.
David Warner plays.
David Warner is the amazing actor, David Warner. His 3rd time playing a character in Star Trek.
By the way, I think it's is it Gul Dumek? Or no, that's
Gul
the
Dumek?
other. Gul Dumek is the other Gull that we're dealing with.
The other Gull that we're dealing with is
the torture. We'll just call David Warner the torturer. There he is.
You have extensive notes. You texted me these extensive notes.
I did.
I don't take notes. I never pretend to take notes.
That's what happens. My notes are not are only as good as my mind.
So, while Picard is being tortured on the Cardassian base, Captain Jellicoe is trying to take command of the Enterprise.
Yep.
And there's some resistance from Riker and some other regulars. But
I would say it's more like Captain Jellicoe doesn't understand why it's so casual and informal on the Enterprise. He's like, this ship's like a piece of shit, basically.
You're a slacker, McFly.
You're
a slacker.
I have a lot to say about Captain Jellicoe.
I do too.
Anyways, go
on. The cliffhanger is actually when Picard is captured, and the 2nd episode comprises of Jellicoe,
Gul Madred.
The 2nd episode is composed of the basically the mind game between Picard and Gul Madred. Picard is being tortured endlessly by Gul Madred, but he stands firm. The main avenue of this torture is that he's trying to get him to. There's 4 lights behind Gul Madred, and he wants to break Picard down and get him to say there are 5, because this will signify that Picard has been broken, that his mind and his spirit are his to control, and it's up until the very end of the episode. Because Captain Jellicoe unveils a very ingenious plan to get the Cardassians to do what he wants, thanks to some help from Riker and Geordi. They place mines.
And Troy, you got to give Troy credit in the.
Troy, what did she do? Except put on a standard uniform for the first time.
Oh boy, we're gonna have a lot to talk about.
What
Go on.
Troy
Sorry.
do? I don't know.
Sorry.
I don't remember what Troy did. You'll have to inform me of this. But yeah, basically Jellicoe has the Cardassians by the balls, and they're like, "Give us Picard, leave the system, or we're gonna blow all of you up." And they concede, and they're gonna hand over Picard, and they do. But Picard might have been broken if he had remained there for a moment longer, and he confesses
just
this
a moment longer. Yeah, that's true.
He confesses to Troy in a pretty stunning revelation at the end, and that's pretty much the episode. An episode which I'm going to do something different. If you're going to do something different, I'm going to do something different. I'm rating it an 8.5 right now, folks. This is a top. These are 2 top episodes. I have issues with them, but it's probably the last gasp of 2-parter greatness from the show.
I'm so surprised that you didn't give this episode 10. I was actually expecting a 10 out of.
An 8.5 is a very, very high rating.
So let's talk about the difference then. What prevented this episode from being a knockout 10 episode for you?
I have to admit, and this is something that Star Trek has done before. I really just don't understand the reason for why Picard, the whole ceremony of Picard is not captain and Jellicoe's captain. I just don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, with that reasoning, in Star Trek V, they could have just put Kirk on a ship that actually worked and sent him to Nimbus 3. I don't understand why they had to put Jellicoe in command of
I think
Enterprise.
the opposite is weirder. I think the Star Trek V, the fact that Kirk doesn't just commandeer another ship that's working is the
exactly
odd. It's the odd
that's what
thing
I'm
out.
saying. It's weird that, but it's stupid on Starfleet's part. But I think.
But I mean, but if you'll recall, I mean, Kirk does basically do the same thing here that happens here to Picard in the motion picture to Deckard. It's just a different tone. Like Picard just handles it like, okay, go ahead. Like, that's fine. Like,
but we've seen other examples where the captain goes on a mission behind enemy lines and he doesn't have to relinquish command. I don't understand why.
I think it's because the Enterprise. My impression is that they needed someone to command the Enterprise through what they already knew was going to be a difficult situation in this sector or whatever, and so I don't know. It's like, okay, so this just goes, I guess your critique is a general critique of Star Trek. Like when it's convenient, there's no other ships around. When it's, like,
right.
It's like, why is the Enterprise? There's so many reasons why we could argue that. So I definitely agree with you that it's like, not always logical. I did like that they did a ceremony. I thought it was interesting that it was in my extensive notes. I thought it was interesting that it was at 1,300 hours. I like the I relieve you, I stand relieved thing, which we see again in the 2009 Star Trek. Just that kind of the way of delivering that. I didn't realize in the 2009 Star Trek that there was even a connection to this. There may not have been an intentional one, but I like the ceremony part a lot. I didn't think that Riker should have been passed up as the commander of the Enterprise while Picard was away. So that was interesting. That doesn't really come back again, as far as I know. Like it would have been cool if they kept like, okay, so Riker keeps passing up these promotions, so now he's like not even looked at as a viable commander anymore. They're like, right. Well, that guy keeps passing up all these like opportunities. Right. So why would we make him? He doesn't seem to have the confidence when it's totally a different reason that he's passing up the promotions. We know that he just really loves being on the Enterprise and he doesn't want to, like, he sees a succession occurring, I think, at this point in his career. I don't think at this point he imagined that, like, he probably imagined that Picard would graduate to fleet captain and that he would then take the Enterprise. And that's cool. I would have been totally cool with that. But of course, that's not how things turn out. We know Riker gets the Titan. So it's a whole different path for him. But I thought it still would have been interesting to explore that a little bit deeper.
You're absolutely right. That's one of the problems I had with the writing of it. But at the same time, what you pointed out is exactly what is happening, and it's amazing to contrast this with Riker in Best of Both Worlds.
Right, a totally different look at Riker. I
mean, when you think about it, Riker pretty much helped save the Federation from the Borg in command of the Enterprise.
Yeah,
and obviously together with with Shelby and the crew, but he was leading, because Picard was Locutus. He was leading that run, and yet we're going to deal with Cardassians, and you're like, oh no, you're not good enough. We're going to bring in this guy. It's a tremendous vote of no confidence.
Kudos to Riker for saying something about it, though. He actually brings it up to Nechayev after she briefs the crew on the full. She doesn't give away every detail, but she basically says like, all I can tell you for now is Captain Picard, Dr. Crusher, and what's Worf's, is he Lieutenant Commander Worf at this point? Yeah, Lieutenant Commander Worf are being sent on a mission, and Captain Jellicoe will command the Enterprise during the mission. So there's this degree of like, Nechayev knows best going on here. What do you think of Admiral Nechayev? This is she's now a fixture, and like she's been around for a while, and she even crosses over into Deep Space Nine. And I don't know if she goes into Voyager or not, but she's pretty she's up there with Nagurum at this point with the amount of appearances.
No one matches Negura. But no, actually, this episode kind of, I mean, the episode is written in a way so you are sort of on Riker's side, on Geordi's side, on the side of the regular bridge crew. So you don't see the Admiral as you don't see her in a very positive light. But behind the scenes, with the doors closed, she obviously shows concern for Picard, and so does Jellicoe. They have a conversation where they're talking about, have you heard about our friend?
Yeah, I like that it was encoded. I love the. I don't know if you see this too much in Star Trek Discovery, but definitely in TNG in the original series, there's a lot of this like duty versus friendship motifs that come up, and I think that's definitely what happens here. Like, it seems that Nechayev, at the very least, if she doesn't know Picard well, at least admires him and considers him one of her best captains. And so of course there's a concern, but she does come across as like pretty on mission, if you will. She doesn't have like don't give a lot of and Jellicoe is actually quite the same way, but I imagine that he's not. I imagine on his own ship, I forget what it was Excelsior class ship, I think, but on his own ship, was it the Hood? Was he the captain of the Hood? Oh, these are the things I don't. These are the important things, and I don't write them down. So, audience, please fill us in the comments below if you remember the name of the ship that Captain Jellicoe commanded. But anyways, he I imagine on his ship, where he's been there for years and his crew's just as used to his style, it's a much warmer atmosphere. Like, I think that the way they make it seem is that Jellicoe is prepared to be permanently the captain of the Enterprise moving forward. Like, if Picard does not return, that he's going to get this command. So it's a very interesting situation to be in, and I think that, like, again, the actor is super awesome. I really liked his performance here, but aside from that, I think it was a great way to show that even though the Enterprise crew has a different way of doing things than maybe the proper chain of command, if you will, to get back to the episode, that their creativity does pay off 9 times out of 10. What did you think of how Data acted the character? Not Brent Spiner, I think, was brilliant as usual, but the character did some really curious things in this episode, and I wondered if you caught the same questions as I did.
What questions did you have?
So, like, I thought it was interesting that Jellicoe, I forget what it was that the first scenario, but the second scenario was Jellicoe comes to Geordi to assess,
and Danny's like, oh, this is possible.
Well, yeah, so rather than letting Geordi, it's Geordi's department, but Data like totally like speaks for him in a sense, and just kind of like forces this work on to Geordi, when Geordi's probably like in his mind thinking like, this is totally unnecessary, we already have everything we need. But Jellicoe insists that we have to be like at a higher efficiency rating for our systems than what's currently there, which is, mind you, the Enterprise is like, they mention the number, it's something like 98% efficiency, and he wants to like so they're already like super efficient with their processes and their systems, but Jellicoe wants that, he wants to get it to that 105% efficiency in a short period of time. So Data's like, it's possible, but he doesn't really like think about the human factor of it, and he kind of says, oh, if you have shifts running around the clock. The other thing I think I forget, Data changes to a red shirt which is interesting as
Well, because
well.
he's
Like
second in command, right?
he's second in command. That's true.
Right.
So very straight.
Well, no, I think what it is that we're shown through Data. Data is responding to the captain of the ship. If Picard had come in and said those things, the crew would have done it. But there's resistance because it's a new guy asking for it. And I think this episode is a wonderful example of you frequently use Next Generation as a way of illustrating workplace ethics,
Relationships
and
and ethics.
relationships
Yeah,
and
there's a
stuff.
lot of that. It's true.
And this episode is this classic scenario we've all been in, where we have whether it's an administrator or a manager or some high-ranking supervisor whom we've worked with for a long period of time, and we've grown to respect and admire, and he or she gets promoted or moved off or something, and then we get some new person, and the new person maybe is viewed as a bit of a balls buster or something, or just different, and we're so used to the other person that there's this resistance. It's a natural human resistance, and Data doesn't have that. Geordi has it, Riker has it, Troy has it, because in reality Jellicoe is not a terrible human being. The episode goes out of its way to show, he has a son, he has his son's pictures on the wall. He when he first comes aboard, he asks Riker, do you prefer William or Will? That's a very warm, he does so very warmly. There's no pretext there. It's only later, it's only over time that he grows to hate Riker. But at the beginning, he's got, the door is open, the hand is extended. He's open to working with them in a positive way. So I think Data is doing what he's doing exactly what he would normally do. He's reacting he's the one that's probably wondering what was missing in this episode, which I think if maybe they'd had a little more time in the script for it, is you didn't have that moment where Data would have said, Geordi, I've noticed that there's a higher level of tension with the captain, and his little, I can't understand you human beings moment. That never happens in this episode. But I'm sure, and you can even kind of read it in his face when he's in engineering, and Geordi kind of pushes back at they're trying to go from 3 to 4 shifts or something.
Well, that was later. Riker was the first thing Jellicoe tells Riker to do when he comes aboard the shift is to increase the rotation from 3 shifts to 4 shifts. Right. He said he wanted it done by tonight. And then later on, after the command exchange ceremony, Picard and Jellicoe are having a conversation, and Picard, Jellicoe's like, so what are you facing? And Picard's like, we're operating on 2-year-old intelligence, like that's what we're going in with. And Jellicoe's like, Jellicoe's great, because you're right, that Jellicoe is like, what I love about Jellicoe, the character, is that and kudos to the writers, because they managed to do this very quickly, is to establish him as someone that, at least as the audience is concerned, can take seriously and sees as a competent commander. Like, he doesn't come across as like just doing these things to posture or create like power. He's a very competent commander, and he's like, oh, the Enterprise will go in and shoot out a couple of probes, so you can have live telemetry to augment this like 2-year-old information, like, so then he comes over, he's like, Will, come over here, and he's like, hey, I need shift number 4 to be ready for this, because we're going to do this and that. And Riker's like, oh, I meant to talk to you about shift number 4. And he's like, oh no, we're not having a fucking conversation about shift number 4. Get it done. He does his famous, he says this a couple times in the episode, like, get it done. That's his thing.
His mantra. Yeah,
that's his mantra. And Picard is totally accepting of it. Like Picard is just like, wow, like maybe I'm not maybe I'm not stern enough with my crew, but like, he doesn't really interfere. Geordi does I think to close out the data thing, I see what you're saying, and I can see that there, but I was just a little concerned that there wasn't like some more empathy maybe from Data, and I don't know if that's just, again, that could be like me probably putting in a little bit too much of a personal
Well, because I think
bias or
naturally
whatever.
the episode is supposed to do that to you. I think if you're a regular viewer, you are supposed to feel, and by token, I think it can be argued that not just Data but Worf seems to love this guy. I mean, Worf is like, a real captain at last. When he finally gets back from the
but
mission.
then
Crusher doesn't like him at all.
Oh no, they later on in part 2 they definitely butt heads. But going back to the kind of machinations of the setup in part 1, I really like that Geordi's bitching at Riker about this as one would. You would, complain to your Riker's basically the manager, right?
Right.
And Riker goes and doesn't feel it necessary to say anything to Picard. He just kind of thinks, like, I thought that was interesting that like Riker chose not to actually bring up any concerns to Picard. And what did you think of that scene? What would you have done?
I would have done if I'd been before the episode, I would have told him something. But because, and I'm saying, having watched it way back then, I learned that was a lesson learned on Next Generation. And I totally understood it once it happened, which is that once you're out, you're out. You can't. It's unfair to Picard to bring him in to that. I know there's the temptation to, and Lord knows I've been in that situation. but it's like you say, you learn a lot of workplace ethics on Next Generation. And this is an excellent example of that. I think this is why it's such a relatable story. And by the way, the 2 parts combined is, I call this Emmy bait. This was really the first time that the show went all out to try to nab Patrick Stewart a nomination. And part of it was bringing in these high caliber guest stars, because Ronnie Cox is he's a very accomplished actor, and like you said, it's not just the writing, but it's the fact that you have Ronnie Cox coming in and playing this part. He really nails it, and I always loved the actor from before, because I was a big fan of RoboCop and Total Recall, and I'd seen him play nicer parts. See, he was at this point he had played a lot of villains, so I think that kind of fed, especially in science fiction.
And he's still working, by the way. He's most recently you can see him in it looks like True Detective was in 2015, but then he's got credits in a show called Nashville in 2018 and The Car Road to Revenge in 2019, whatever that is.
Actually, the best thing to look up, which I don't know if you can, but if you go to his website, he has his own website, and he's a singer.
Oh,
his career took off because he was in the movie Deliverance.
I didn't realize that. That's interesting.
He's in Deliverance, and he knows how to play the banjo. And he has, if you go to ronniecox.com, you have a number of videos, and there's one that's called it's a song that he wrote with a collaborator. It's called Trumped. And he's kind of a folk singer, kind of, that's kind of his style. And he's a very accomplished actor and singer. And he what he brought to the part was that he, like you said, he's very stern, get it done. And that's so where good. the way you can see that as kind of like an asshole kind of thing, but he does play the warmer side very well too. and he's
He
multifaceted.
doesn't. He never comes across to me as an asshole. I think he comes across definitely as stern and like but more like a father figure. But like, I didn't think like that's why I say that the character works really well is because at least from the audience's perspective, we tend to in this episode and the next one we tend to find out things a little bit sooner than the characters do. Just a little bit. You know what I mean? So I feel like that's enough to give us that like understanding that he's doing things with a purpose. Like I think, or
Yeah,
maybe it's just because I've seen it so many times that in this rewatching, I was already like, oh, when's this gonna happen and when's that gonna happen? Um, Speaking of that, we do get it. It is going to be important to point out that like later on in the season, in another two-parter, we get a DS9 crossover. So this is already, I think, in my mind, part of like full integration. Like DS9 and TNG, the events are like basically now concurrent on the two shows.
right. They're
like,
starting to. Yeah.
they're starting to show that connection and showing that there is overlap, and I think that's really cool. I really wish, being a fan of D Space Nine, not as much as TNG as some people, some people DS9. That's their only show, and it is a great show. But I do wish there was more DS9 in the TNG movies. For the Picard show, I would love to see an update on DS9. Like, there's no reason in my mind why we can't get at least like a line or a couple of lines about what's going on in that part of the world. It'd be pretty cool.
I don't think it'll happen, but
It might. DS9's got. We both saw the documentary together. It's gotten more popular as the years have gone by. So who knows what'll happen? But yeah, so I thought it was cool that we get like pretty much the version of the Cardassians we're gonna get on Deep Space Nine here. They've pretty much like solidified that, where we've seen these subtle changes in the Cardassians from their first entry, where they had the like the weird virtual reality masks, and now like I think they figured out the armor and everything.
right.
It's all been kind of like unified.
Well, it's interesting, and yeah, this is again the acting is top notch, and same goes for both David Warner and the actor who plays the other Gaul, who has been on other Next Generation episodes playing other aliens. The makeup makes him, and also just his natural. I mean, he's just a naturally skinny guy. He just looks very reptilian, almost dinosaur-like, with the makeup and his movements. And then the other two guys that are to both sides of him are also kind of long and lanky, and the Cardassians have a very menacing reptilian look to them in the story, and it really establishes the Cardassians very well as foes to be wary of. Compare this to, say, the biggest blunder the show ever made, which was the Ferengi. Compare the rollout of the Cardassians to how they roll out the Cardassians as the big bad that is coming, both here and on DS9, as you said. I think it was magnificently played by the two actors. These two actors bear a lot of credit for establishing the Cardassians as something to be watching for. Like, holy crap,
Yeah, and then I would say David Warner takes that to times infinity with his performance as Gul Madred, like, and then you get like revelations about how, like, there's ties into Picard's interest with archaeology and, like, great civilizations that have changed, and it's like a really interesting thing, like when Picard kind of challenges him as to whether or not the militaristic Cardassian empire is better than the peaceful spiritual empire of old. Like, so it's a really interesting thing. But he says, like, and this is all episode to Steph, but he says to Picard, like, I like that line where he's like, well, at least there's food. Everyone has food. He's like, yeah, but Picard says something like, yeah, their bellies might be full, but their souls will be empty. You know, like there's just some really great, juicy exchanges between the two of them. And I think it's still such a relevant thing. It's like the danger of the, military industrial complex as so many people talk
Yeah.
about. And it's like, you could see that the Cardassians are being portrayed as an example of what might happen if we go, full in on that kind of mentality and that kind of idea.
Well, the story aired in 1992, so the backdrop is really the Cold War is ending, and we have we have sort of the conflicts in the eastern part of Europe and in former Soviet Union Russia is how much of what is the role of the military here, and like you said, that line where Picard is which, by the way, what a great line, and he's saying these kinds of things under duress and days of torture. I mean, only Picard could do that, But it does sort of, the Cardassians do sort of seem like a warning that we cannot let military takeovers of government. You're right. It's sort of a coded message saying, democracies flourish when people, the common, the citizens are in charge, not the military. But by the same token, you do have what's David Warner's character again?
Gul Madred.
Gul Madred has these stories of people, of him as a young child starving in the streets, and it paints this picture of a society just completely broken down, and these are the moments where
my exact notes during that time was like it was kind of the way I related it now as an adult, and I related it definitely differently as a kid, was but like imagining what kind of environment he grew up in. It doesn't sound different from the descriptions of like Syria today,
right, exactly.
or places like that.
Right, or Venezuela, or
Yeah.
or these places that we're talking about, the immigrants coming to the United States from Central America. Why? Because there's such violence and breakdown of society. Into such situations, the people who are there do welcome the military in many occasions, because they seem like, oh, they're going to set things right, because they're going to impose rules, and that's what we need. So the Cardassians, in many ways, when he says, I pity you, it is the Cardassians don't come off as just they don't come off as unlogically evil. There's a reason for why they are the way that we see them. There's a process that brought them to that, and through Picard, we kind of see a hint of, but there is some good in them, if they just kind of steer in the other direction. We see the daughter come in. I thought that was an extraordinary scene where his daughter.
Yeah, it's still
Picard
very powerful today. Yeah,
and it's almost like he's playing dead almost. And then after the daughter's gone, he kind of lets on that he was very aware the whole time, and he's like, and he makes some comment like, "Wow, it's amazing how you would actually expose your child to such a depravity such as this."
Yeah, it was another great moment where Picard has the victory. The whole thing is so good because Picard even tells him in that one scene, he's like, what other reason are you doing this? It's been proven over and over through experience throughout many cultures, many societies, many eras and epochs that torture is not a effective method of gathering intelligence or information. So you're definitely, this is not, you're not doing what's the real reason behind this? And he challenges him, and he's like, that's when he has the upper hand, because he realizes like, oh, you're just a sad individual who's taking revenge for what life did to you when you were a child. And that drives Gul Madred kind of insane. And I wonder if Gul Madred is broken at the end of this episode, if Picard isn't the one that actually broke him. And I would have loved a follow-up to this story as well. I think the thing is that like we definitely see more of his trauma from his Borg capture, but this one I think was just as poignant in many ways to me.
yeah.
Like, I thought like that we don't really hear about the after effects of this one, so it might be interesting to see if that comes into play later on.
I mean, again, like I said, the episode aired in 92, but as time has gone on, the episode bears more and more, it resonates more and more. I mean, how after 9/11, all the conversations that were had about, does torture work, is torture right, does the United States torture, and here is Next Generation, 10, 15
Ahead of its time, yeah.
saying no, it doesn't, stating something so matter-of-factly, way ahead of its time. And this story, I think, grows in stature because of it. And you're right, Picard was the one who endured the torture and the imprisonment, but it seems like Gul Madred is the one who maybe is the broken man after. He's the one that he has changed equally
From this encounter. He does say that he thinks that Picard will be his greatest challenge yet, and so he, self-fulfilling prophecy, I suppose.
Yeah, it's true.
What did you think of the scenes where we were talking about how there was some overlap in Picard and Crusher and Worf for training on the holodeck, and we get some shots of the training, but then they actually go on their mission and they have to do that whole thing where they, I think the name of the Ferengi was Daemon Solek or
yeah,
something like that. Like, there's a little bit of Star Wars, I think there, maybe a little Star Wars, maybe Star Trek, maybe not Star Wars, maybe a little
8.5 territory there.
Or maybe it was.
Let me be specific. It's an 8.5 for episode 1.
Oh,
because it is 2 episodes.
Oh, so we don't know your rating for episode 2 until the end. I like this. So I like it.
Yeah, that
so
was.
Wait, did I have to give my rating for episode 1 as well? Since we're both saying. Okay, so my rating for episode 1 is a 9.2.
Is that right? A 9.2.
That's right. A 9.2. So
9.2. There it is.
No, are you fucking kidding me? The whole thing gets a 10. I'm telling you
there
right
are
now.
4 lights.
There are 10 stars.
When we were in high school, do you remember
how often
we went with quoting that?
With quoting that, yes. I think that was we said there are 4 lights more than anything at random. Just on random, we'd be in the hallway and
there are 4 lights.
There are 4 lights. He really barks it at the end in the last scene there.
He
And I
does.
could have sworn he spat when I was a kid. I could have sworn he spat at the at the desk, but that doesn't happen. It was
We can
not in.
confirm that because of the clarity of the Blu-ray. We can confirm. No
Are
spittle.
you still watching all these on Blu-ray? Do you have all the Blu-ray, all the seasons on Blu-ray?
No, I only have
okay.
two-parters. Actually, that's wrong. Only certain two-parters got the Blu-ray treatment.
Wait, you're telling me that the whole series is not on Blu-ray? I was thinking of like,
But I don't
okay.
have the series on Blu-ray. I just have the ones I
Gotcha.
want.
So you're watching on Netflix like I am. Then you're watching
unless I have the Blu-ray.
Unless you have the Blu-ray. That's fantastic. Okay, cool. So you're saying that scene with Dave on Solek was one of the reasons why you gave this first part an 8.5.
That was pretty crappy, unnecessary.
What do you think? I mean,
what were they trying to do? Recapture Star Trek 3's?
That's what I was thinking. It was a little bit of the Star Trek 3 vibe for sure.
And then the clothes that they walk in with are just like War has this like neon blue. I'm like, what the fuck? Come on. Please.
You have to give Star Trek this. I know you don't watch much of Star Trek Discovery, but you have to give them this. If you were a viewer, their civilian clothing is the most realistic I've seen so far on Star Trek. It's still a little outrageous at times. Like Spock is wearing like medieval style tunics made of leather, but I love it. I think it looks good. It looks better than
nothing beats civilian garb on Buck Rogers. To me, the future is still the bar is set by Buck Rogers. For all of those out there who know what I'm talking about,
I actually know what you're talking about. I actually know what you're talking about, and I
could pull it off.
I can't say that I disagree. That would be an amazing future. I can't say that I disagree.
Jill Gerard.
Jill Gerard, yes.
Yeah.
So that none of that stuff worked for you at all.
Crusher's like fakes. I mean, that whole seduction scene with the ears, it just played off. It was just dorky. It was stupid.
She does what is it called? The Ferengi ear massage.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, really?
Yeah, it's true.
That was kind of sad. I mean, there was a similar scene in Best of not Unification.
Unification,
where Riker goes to a bar and he starts playing the piano. He starts playing something, and that also equally was. I mean, in retrospect, that's amazing cinema compared to what we got here. But still, I don't know. Star Trek Next Generation just doesn't get bars right unless it's 10 forward. They just don't get that atmosphere right, and
we're gonna get
how to act in a bar.
We're gonna get Face of the Enemy, which is the Troy Romulan episode. And so, speaking of unification, you get a little unification follow up in this season as well.
Speaking of Troy. I think one of the joy. I don't know if you remember back when we were kids. There was Team Jellicoe and there was Team Picard. I was clearly on Team Jellicoe. I
was Team Picard all the way for sure.
Picard all the way. I think you probably was as well. I was on Team Jellicoe. I was like, keep him on board. Picard can go.
You were ready. You were ready.
Riker will get used to it.
You really were excited when part one ended that
yes, absolutely
that the show was going to change. And that's odd to me because you really like Picard now. Like it's a different story now, right?
No.
Obviously, like no.
No, I'm still on Team Jellicoe.
Oh dang.
It's great. I think they should have
old wounds never heal. It seems. Wow.
But Jellicoe has some
Wow.
great lines, and one of my favorites is yeah, Troy comes in, playing the Troy card. Captain, I really think you need to give this crew a second chance. Da da da. And he's like, okay, well, you know what? You fix the morale. That's your problem. And
Oh
by the
yeah,
way,
that
I want you wearing a
a
standard
standard
uniform from now on.
uniform.
And it's just like, in her face, it's like, and suddenly I'm struck. I'm like, so wait a minute. So Picard, what does that say about Picard?
Are you saying that it says that Picard
Yeah,
is run?
you don't have to wear.
I always wondered as a fan, what was the deal with Counselor Troy wearing a non-standard
Now
uniform?
we know.
No, but we still don't know. It just it changes. Jellicoe changes it, but we never get any reason, as far as I'm aware, why Picard allowed for her to wear just non-standard uniforms.
Picard
Of course,
really admires her.
speaking of my preoccupation or fascination with relating TNG to the workplace, it is interesting to know that today's environment, depending on your role, no longer requires like a uniform, if you will. Like most people are allowed to wear whatever they want to at work, and I actually love it. I think that it's really great. Like I think that like what's that?
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, so like it's no more, a requirement in certain roles. You're always going to wear a suit, like that's just, if you're in that role, you got to wear a suit. Like it's not going to, a lawyer, for example, will probably always wear some kind of formal attire because of the nature of and the severity of like what's going on. You don't want to distract. You don't want like, a distraction like a hoodie with like lawyer written across it while you're dealing with like Supreme Court, level issues or whatever. So I could totally understand that, but like a counselor, I wonder, as that in that role, like, does she need to come across as like someone who's like formal? Does she need to be wearing a uniform? I always thought that was an interesting question. But she wears it from now on out. Like that's it.
Influence.
It's a lasting influence of Captain Jellicoe. That's the one of the things that like changes throughout the rest of Star Trek. I don't know how the actress felt about the whole thing or any of the behind the scenes stuff. I never like really went that deep into trying to find out, but I do remember that was something that was like kind of like a moment that still resonates to this day, that like Counselor Troy was like not wearing, had a rank, and she never wore the uniform. She didn't even have the rank pips on her like leotard or whatever it is that she normally wears. So it was interesting. That was very interesting.
And the other great line is so it's like, get that fish out of my office.
Oh yeah, there goes the little lionfish.
Which by the way, Ronnie Cox, the actor, revealed in a recent interview that Patrick Stewart hated the fish, and that was a way to write the fish out of. Because I guess does the fish not come back after this?
I don't know.
I don't think so.
I don't know.
I mean, the implications that it.
I mean, I have to say that like I didn't notice until just very recently how often the desk crystal is in the show. Like this thing's in so many episodes, and I never used to notice. But now that I have one, so now I'm gonna watch out. One of the things we're gonna watch out for the rest of the season is the fish there after this episode.
Well, he says that in the interview, he said Patrick Stewart hated the fish. Because he thought, here we are, the Federation, we're the epitome of, let's respect all life and everything. And what does the captain of the Enterprise have? This animal imprisoned in glass in his ready room.
What they don't show you is that the fish have little channels that run alongside the Jeffries tubes, and they interface.
That's the dolphins, sir.
They interface with the cetacean navigators that are located in the forward section of the ship, and they support them. So the fish are actually not prisoners. We've used the universal translator to communicate with them, and they're totally okay with their arrangement.
Okay, all right. Well, now that you've cleared that up, I don't know about that. But yeah, I thought that was interesting that Ronnie Cox said that Patrick Stewart actually hated the fish. So Patrick Stewart hated the fish, and Brent Spiner hated the cat.
If Captain Jellicoe had remained as if Patrick Stewart left the show after this and Captain Jellicoe had remained, I would have definitely still watched Star Trek. But I have to say that I have to say though that like I'm happy with the way things worked out. I do love Picard more than Captain Jellicoe at the end of the day. I think Captain Jellicoe's own crew needed him, and it's a good thing that Captain Picard survived. And through Captain Jellicoe's own efforts, mind you, I think that's essential to what brought Captain Picard back home.
What did you think about the scene? Well, have we exhausted episode 1?
Almost. There was just the only thing I think left was to talk a little bit about why Picard was chosen for the mission, in case that wasn't clear. But if that's clear, so the theta band,
that also
theta band waves,
that creaked a little bit for me. I was like, really? There's only 3 people in the entire Starfleet that know about this. And by the way, can't somebody just study it real quick?
I mean, so also this idea.
By the way, that's the other thing that I mean, Patrick Stewart is. I mean, when you think of someone, and this is kind of, I guess, is the beginning of trying to redefine Picard as more of an action captain, which was per Patrick Stewart's request, which the movies give into 100%. The show started doing that, especially here. You know, it's a very physical part they're asking Patrick Stewart to do here. But I'm sorry, but it hasn't really been. That's not how they've sold Picard up until now. I mean, really, when you think of a physical captain, you still think of Kirk. You know, that image of Kirk walking around
even
with the he was always working out. He was always physical. Picard isn't. So
as a matter of fact, Jellicoe reminds me a lot about of Kirk with his cowboy sort of diplomacy, and that was actually another part in the first episode, which was really well done. Is like the whole negotiations and the behind the scenes, like Jellicoe's like kind of his reasoning. And after that first time when he yells and he like does all these theatrics and like kind of scares the shit out of the Cardassian cat, the gull who's there. I like that scene. You don't watch Game of Thrones, or do you?
I have.
You have. What I liked about that scene, again, not something obviously not intentional, as Game of Thrones didn't exist back then, but like there's that one scene afterwards where Troy is like challenging him, and he says, Cardassians, they're like wolves in a pack. They're really strong. When they're by themselves, they're like very they're sort of very suspicious and cautious. And he says, so you got to learn to think like a wolf and in order to beat them at their game. And so I think that's a good nickname actually for Captain Jellicoe, the Wolf. Like I propose that from here on out we refer to Captain Jellicoe as the Wolf. But even aside from that, she says, be careful though, because when you act like a wolf, sometimes you face the same ending, or just some like little quip. And he goes, well, the trick is to be the wolf still standing. And so you can see he's just got a very Kirk style banter with her in that scene. In my opinion, I saw a lot of that kind of like, and is he a dying breed? Because we don't get, Cisco is not like that. He's got his own brand of crazy, but Cisco's like still a very different, kind of captain.
He's very measured.
What's that?
Measured.
Measured. He's very measured and like, but he's also has a degree of like, I don't know. Cisco just has some like, not to be totally cliche here, but some Cajun flavor in his jambalaya of
Yeah.
captaincy there. It's like
Uh,
I'm probably gonna get in trouble for that. Great, but anyways, Jellicoe just has a style to him that like I think it might be a dying thing in the Federation. He might be like a relic of the Kirk era of captains, and we're going now into more like a different era of captains where Picard is like the model citizen, if you will, and no one really, no one really. Picard's definitely noted as one of the most premier captains in the Federation. I mean, he's even in the when Gul Madredi captures him, he even says like, your serial number is this, you're the famous Captain Picard, or some kind of line, along those lines. So I thought that was interesting.
well, let's you asked the question. Let's discuss that. Why capture Picard? Why are we always capturing Picard? I have the answer, by the way. This is not a.
It's a rhetorical question. Well, if I had to guess at what you were getting at, I would just say that like it's because Picard is so, he's like considered the moral standard. He's the best that the Federation has to offer when it comes to like a leader or a captain, and I think that the Cardassians think that that would be like a huge blow to their adversaries, the Federation. If we were to capture like your one of your like most famous humans, and actually most famous persons is more apt. This is, I think, tantamount at this point in Picard's career to capturing Kirk in Kirk's later career as well, like in his film era career. So I think that Picard is already at that level with the Borg situation, with all kinds of other ways that he's already like been involved on the galactic stage, if you will. He's become famous to the enemies just as much as he is internally.
I think, and this is nothing. There's nothing in the show that explicitly backs this up, this theory. But excuse me, my personal headcanon, I guess you want to say, is Picard offers something unique that no other captain has. No other captain has, and that is that he was Locutus. He
Oh,
had direct connection with the Borg, and it is a connection that uh, the Borg in effect threatens everybody. It doesn't, whether you're Romulan, Cardassian, whatever. There's we can have war with the Dominion, everything, but the one thing that trumps everything is the Borg. When the Borg come into the picture, you're like, okay, let's deal with this. This is top priority. And Picard has that very, very unique connection with the Borg. And I think I would like to think that anybody that tries to capture him or whatever, because they never kill him. They never want to kill him. They want to capture him. They want to kidnap him and keep him. They do so
well, the
because
Romulans had a different similar plan by cloning.
owning him.
It's
That's precisely why.
like,
Why did they?
which is
Because
which is funny. It's all that's kind of might be going on in the background as this episode's going on. Is like that whole operation from the Romulans is like, if you think about it. But anyways, go
right.
on.
I mean, there. My thinking is that all of these different powers believe that if they have Picard, they have an upper hand whenever the Borg come knocking, and that's how I.
That's an
Uh,
interesting. That's definitely an interesting way of looking at it. I hadn't even thought about that, but it's definitely an interesting thing to consider. I do think that, like, you're right. I think it's also a little bit of all of the above, though. I mean, he's definitely like, gained notoriety now as someone that is a fierce a fierce adversary in battle, as well as in negotiations, and he represents everything kind of that would break the morale of the Federation. It is interesting also that Star Trek, always kind of seems to, by the nature of the structure of the show, like one character always does seem to have this level of notoriety, and I think that that's something interesting, that it would be curious to have a captain in a future show that struggles. I think we were meant to get that through Burnham from a lower decks perspective, or from the perspective of someone who's not the captain. But I think if I could do the big redo button and relaunch Discovery, like I might actually start Burnham out as a captain that struggles to be a Picard or a Cisco or a Janeway or a Kirk, or a Pike, depending what era your show is set in, and I think that like Jellicoe, ironically, is that captain. As great as he is, as cool as he is, he's not Captain Picard, and he even kind of knows it. And I think his advantage here is that he's trying to say, well, here I am aboard the most famous starship in the fleet, and there's still room for improvement, and like that's kind of like his an interesting perspective that he brings in.
Yeah. Well, we've been at it for an hour.
Part one. Wait, part two. So part two, really quickly.
Part two.
But just to finish up real quickly on part one, I did want to point out that like it was a cool twist when the Cardassian delegate, commander, the Gull, then all of a sudden presents Jellicoe. Jellicoe's riding high on his like, posturing, and then all of a sudden he's like, well, it's interesting that you say there's no plan to do this. We just happen to have captured some of your crew. And then he sends Riker off on that side mission, of course, and everything like that. And I thought that was a great way to like kind of end the episode, where you think everything's going like exactly according to plan, and then Picard gets captured, the negotiations start to break down, they fail. We go to part two, and Jellicoe actually has to change his tone a little bit, and now he's like more concerned with like, all right, I got to partner with the crew to make this happen. And Geordi's the one who helps him figure out that the Cardassian ship was in that nebula, that there might be more there. And then the plan with the mines comes up, and then it turns out that like they actually figure out why the Romulans needed Captain Picard. It's because look at me, I'm so Romulan. The Romulans, the Cardassians needed Picard is because they think he would have this like vital information for that planet, that strategic planet or whatever. One thing that I thought kind of overall parts 1 and 2, and this is not something that I'm going to dock the episodes for because of, but there's a mention, and I never noticed this before, but I think Discovery has me thinking on these like epic scales, because Discovery does these like outrageous things, like having like 1,000 drones aboard the ship. But Jellicoe does say, I want 500 mines prepared, and so we like, yeah, you thought the same thing?
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason why, and I'm sorry, I'm going to turn this into a criticism of Discovery, is I who are running Discovery, since they don't have the institutional knowledge, let's say, for lack of a better term, of Star Trek, they can't, so this is something Enterprise had, but Discovery doesn't, which is that I don't think a show like Enterprise would have made a mistake of having 100 million drones fly out of the ship, when you're like, wait a minute, but
what I was going to say is, so my critique,
drones, then why doesn't the Enterprise D have a zillion drones that can do
right
this? Why do we need one shuttlecraft?
Right. But not only that, they deploy 500 mines from the one shuttlecraft. So my question is like, how many runs did they do back and forth? Were they replicating them on the shuttlecraft? Like, what was what
No.
was going on? It's interesting because in the scenes on the shuttlecraft, and again, this is again, I'm not docking the show because like obviously they don't have the budget to do the effects work and all that stuff. But Jordy's got like 10 of them in the shuttlecraft, and he's like, and then I wonder how are they even deploying them? I think it would have been cool if they had just a little more procedure, just for those fans
I
that
imagine
like
you were transporting them. That's why Jordy's there to make sure they're transported right in the right spot.
in the right
And
spot. It is cool though. It's a great, regardless of the execution, it is a great moment when Jellicoe is basically like, "Hey, I've got these mines planted
yeah,
all over your ships, and so your move."
he blows them and his wife, deploy,
Yeah,
explode number 2935.
right, exactly. It's pretty cool. What
He's
did
like
you
baby explosion,
what
and you
did
see the thing shimmy and the Cardassian, whatever ship he's on reacts to it. So
right. I
close.
would. I wish we had more, as much as again at this point in TNG, I'm willing to accept that Riker has these skills, but I wish we had seen other examples of Riker's piloting skills, and I also wish that we could get that like in a more spectacular looking way in terms of special effects. So I wish that we had seen, other than a joystick, like we get in Star Trek Insurrection, you get the joystick, and then he pilots, he manually pilots the Enterprise through that tough situation using one little joystick, which is pretty funny. Um,
Fine with it. I'm
but do you
fine with
think Jellicoe? Geordi says like I could fly this mission, but you really want Riker to do it. And I assume that other crew members also pointed to Riker. So what do you think of Jellicoe and that scene where he has to come and basically eat crow in front of Riker and ask him for his help?
that. I think that's the only when they actually admit that they hate each other. When Jellicoe says, I think that he thinks Riker's a terrible first officer. I mean, he's wrong. I think he's wrong. I think it does bring Jellicoe down a bit for me. And I mean, I love Jellicoe. I mean, you said if Jellicoe had stayed in this, imaginary alternate show, I would imagine that Jellicoe would eventually learn to trust Will Riker, and that would have been an interesting development on that show if that show had ever happened. But I think it's a bit harsh. But again, I think it points to what you say. These are things that do happen commonly in workplaces. I have been in situations where I mean, not to make myself a martyr, but I've been in situations where the school loves me and they think I do a great job, but said administrator comes in and frickin' hates me, and I don't know why, and I really don't know why Jellicoe hates Riker. I mean,
Right.
really, in that you see that he really doesn't respect. It's not that he doesn't like him; he doesn't respect him. He doesn't think that it's not that he doesn't think he's captain material. He doesn't think he's first officer material, which is
Right.
extremely harsh.
Right.
And but it's all because of first impressions count a lot. And let's face it, Riker left a bad first impression when he didn't he didn't change the shift and then of course the confrontation. Let's not forget that confrontation where
He actually yells.
he yells him down, he barks
Yeah.
at him, and Riker is doing his job, but Jellicoe just can't handle it and relieves him of command.
It's funny because I think from Jellicoe's perspective, like there's going to be a battle. Like he's preparing for a full on battle, and he's trying to get these people in his mind, I think, definitely ready to be as efficient and like as possible because he thinks that that's what saves lives, which is true. It does. Like, there's nothing wrong with that.
Nothing
But
wrong with that.
he does go too far in this case, and he definitely does have a strong opinion about Riker, which is definitely evident in what you said, like how he questions Picard about like, oh, he's your first officer. I'm sure he's great, but that's your first officer. Like there's definitely like that kind of quality to it. Yeah.
And
Right. We already talked about the torture stuff, which is the majority of this episode when we were talking about the first half of the episode. But I think some notes that I still have here are regarding the torture. I remember that there was quite an uproar about seeing Patrick Stewart in the buff.
I've forgotten that.
Did you not remember? There was like quite a lot of
that. Yeah, they cut his clothes and there he is, and he's strung up. Yeah,
and we don't get like any like full frontal or rear nudity, thank goodness, because it was the network.
Remember in the 90s we had NYPD Blue.
Was the first time it broke the butt barrier, right?
So we had shows edging into that territory, and again, this especially now let's talk about part two. Part two is Emmy bait. There is really no reason on this in this planet other than an absolute bias against space-based science fiction that Patrick Stewart did not get a nomination at the very least for this episode. This episode has him doing everything.
Do you know if the episode did get an Emmy or a nomination?
No, he did not get an Emmy nomination. His only Emmy nomination was for the last season. But this story, like I said, other shows would do this. They would bring in big name guest actors, because frequently what would happen is that because I don't know if it's still that way now, because I don't watch the Emmys as often as I used to, but the actor or actress would get the nomination for one episode. I mean, typically it's for recognizing a season's worth, but the one episode is the one that gets you nominated. And frequently the producers would would throw in really great guest cast, because they know that they can kind of get 2-for-1 deal, because there's also the Emmy category of best guest actor in a series. And really David Warner and Ronnie Cox could have gotten a nomination, as well. I think Ronnie Cox does a great job. When you really look at his performance and what he does, he's really excellent. You really do imagine an alternate Next Generation with this guy in command. I mean, at least I do. And David Warner, considering the fact that most of the part, he admitted he was reading off cue cards when he was doing those scenes, because he was cast at the last possible moment, and he didn't have time to learn the script.
Oh, wow.
They're holding cue cards behind Patrick Stewart, and David Warner is reading the lines off the cue cards, and with that in mind, he turns in a great performance. And
wow.
Have actors like that, of that caliber, everybody ups their game. Everybody does. So Patrick Stewart was like, he must have been on cloud 9.
Yeah.
So his interplay between him and the Cardassian really should have earned him an Emmy nomination.
I agree with that 100%. It's too bad. It's too bad that he wasn't. Maybe he'll get some Emmy nominations for Picard, because he's definitely matured as an actor.
because I think there's still a bias against. I think
Science fiction.
not science fiction, space-based science fiction. Because shows like Quantum Leap, Scott Bakula won Emmys for Quantum Leap. This guy on X-Files, and Gillian Anderson as well. But that is science fiction that is earthbound. It's minimally science fiction. It's science fiction mostly in kind of like in the edge. But there's kind of a bias, like for example, The Expanse, which is you and Sean's favorite show.
I love that show.
That show will never get a nomination for Best Actor.
What are you talking about?
Because they're wearing suits. Battlestar Galactica. Did Battlestar Galactica get Emmy nomination?
I don't know. Actually, I don't pay attention to the Emmys enough to know who got what.
I don't remember if it did. If it did, then that's a break for space science fiction. But it's a shame that Patrick Stewart didn't get at least a nomination, and he was wrong.
I know that shows like Star Trek, whatever the award is, tend to get, like, whether it's Golden Globes or Emmys or whatever, they tend to get a lot of technical achievement awards. Like, I do know that, and stuff like that. So, but I definitely think that The Expanse has performances that complement the overall production of the show, meaning Emmy Award caliber. So I do hope they do get some nominations, but I also think that, like, it is a shame if that was an intentional thing on the part of the board of nominators, whoever does the Emmys, where they would ignore science fiction, space-based science fiction performances. I think that they're missing out on some pretty epic stuff and need to go back and watch episodes like this to see it.
Galactica only got technical.
Crazy,
but that is the stigma, and I think there's plenty of fine acting happening on shows like this. But Patrick Stewart. I think Patrick Stewart should have been nominated for this, and he gave a better performance here than he did in anything he did in the last season. So.
Jonathan Frakes teased by putting a picture of a trombone up. I know he's directing a couple of episodes of the Picard show, but I wonder, do you think, would you be excited to see Riker come back in the Picard show? What is your expectation for the cast other than Patrick Stewart? None whatsoever. The Doctor's being cautiously optimistic. Exactly. All right, so should we? Any other things in your notes?
I don't have notes.
You have no notes?
I never have notes.
There are 4 notes.
Your notes.
What's that? Nothing. We covered every single point on my notes, which is really exciting. Huh?
Every single one.
Every single thing we talked about. We even talked about the epilogue earlier when you mentioned Troy and Picard sitting together and Picard admitting that he would have, that he actually, not just that he would have done anything, but that he actually saw 5 lights. That he actually, in his mind,
he could have believed that there were 5 lights.
He could have believed that he wasn't lying, that he was speaking the honest truth when he would have said that there were 5 lights.
Which proves, in the episode, it proves what he said, which is that torture doesn't work, because you'll say whatever you will, after so much, you will say whatever it is your captors want you to say, because you just want it to stop.
Yep.
You just want it to. So that's why it doesn't. There are those who argue that it doesn't work.
And this episode argues it beautifully, or illustrates. If nothing else, I think that's something that hit home for me. And I think it prepared many to be like Picard. If you're ever in a torture situation, if you're ever in a situation where you're being tortured, just remember Captain Picard. May you never be in a situation where you're tortured. Doctor, I give this episode part 2 a 10, which I've already stated. So my 9.2 and my 10 average out to about a 10. A 9.999, the warp limit. And mainly, I think the strength of it all is on everything that we've talked about. I think neither, whatever our actual rating numbers are and whatever we think that those mean, we both seem to come to the conclusion that this was a pretty good two-parter. All in all, it wasn't boring. It had some interesting things going on. There are a few incongruities, but we're starting to become used to that. And some questionable things here and there that maybe are only there to advance the plot along, but overall it does a good job of, I think, sucking us into this very real and scary scenario, beautifully acted by Patrick Stewart and the whole gang.
I forgot to. Another reason why the first episode is an 8.5. I think a lot of those scenes set in the underground caverns are a bit wonky for me. I mean, that part where the cave-in happens, and I mean, those are supposed to be really heavy rocks. Crusher should have died, but yet it's just like they're just styrofoam. Yeah, no, I'm okay.
Welcome to Star Trek, Doctor. Welcome to. You're just starting to notice these things now. I mean, I feel like
afraid of bats suddenly.
That's right. We forgot to talk about the bat.
And that's it.
Worf is, after all, the cowardly lion, isn't he?
Okay. The second episode earns a 9 from me. It's a remarkable episode in terms of acting. The acting just trumps anything.
Could this have been a season finale and season opener in your mind?
Oh yeah, it would have been awesome. It would have been awesome. A side note.
Yes.
There is a recent Next Generation comic book series in which the Next Generation, it's the Next Generation in the Mirror universe.
Oh yes, I've heard about this.
Picard is in command of the Stargazer, and the plot deals with him stealing the Enterprise, because the Enterprise is a secret weapon that nobody knows about that the Empire has created. And guess who he has to steal it from?
Jellicoe.
So
oh wow!
He convinces Riker, who is the first officer for Jellicoe. He helps convince Riker to betray Jellicoe, and gets Picard and Picard's crew from the Stargazer, which includes Barclay, Data, Troy, and others, and they take the Enterprise D.
That's nuts.
Nuts. It really is nuts. They throw him out the airlock, Jellicoe. It's worth reading.
Oh man, they throw Jellicoe out of the airlock.
Poor Jellicoe.
I don't know about the believability of that.
Well, no, trust me, they make it work. I have one more question to ask you, and it's a question I will ask you again in our season recap. Would you like to have seen Jellicoe return to Next Generation?
Yes, 100% yes.
They were thinking of it.
How are they going to do it?
Rodney Cox. There's a very good interview with him on StarTrek.com. I don't usually go for the official .coms, but I was looking. But I have to admit, there was a really good interview.
It's odd that you wouldn't trust the official .com. So it's so odd. It's not a government. It's a TV show. God damn it. Go on.
I don't trust them. But anyway, in the interview, and he said that they did try. They were actually, he was going to be in command of the Enterprise. They wanted him to be in command of the Enterprise during Tapestry.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it.
Which makes sense because, I mean, the story.
I think that Jellicoe could have come back, but in like a fleet situation, like where command. I would have liked to have seen Jellicoe come back and then seen the perspective of what it's like on his actual ship, like where he's got the camaraderie of the crew, and like where the crew trusts him as much as blindly, basically, like are as loyal to him as you would think a crew that's served with you for a long time has served. Because it is interesting, like I said, it is not the norm, I think, that a ship would have a commander for so long as the Enterprise. And I think that's part of the charm, is that like it seems like the Enterprise has had these commanders for long periods of times. In this case, with TNG, we even get the destruction of the D and a whole new ship. So it's like Captain Picard's like, normally you would think like they'd be like, oh yeah, you destroyed a ship, we're gonna put a new commander in charge. But no, Picard gets to keep the Enterprise until he retires, and Kirk has the same sort of privilege. And so I don't think that is common. I don't think it's going to be something that we see often. I think that's part of the reason why we don't see any more adventures, is because we're like, oh, but Picard, what are you talking about? Picard would command the Enterprise till he like gets old, but he apparently he doesn't. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. We'll see.
I want to ask you with regards to Jellicoe. Oh gosh, I lost my train of thought.
Oh, well, what I was trying to get at is that I think Jellicoe is that type of commander for the Hood or whatever his ship is. I think that like there are a few commanders that you can just see are going to be in those posts for life, and I think Jellicoe is that way with the Hood. I mean, he would definitely take command of the Enterprise if needed, but as long as Picard wants it, he's happy to step aside. He's not. I don't think he's thirsting for the command of the Enterprise. In other words.
The thing that still strikes me after this discussion and watching the episode, I think that the thing that hits me the most, and it's sad, is Riker. Is how because I imagine, I think of him in Best of Both Worlds, where I think that's the pinnacle of Riker as a character on this show. I don't think he ever matches anything. That he peaks in Best of Both Worlds in the two-parter. The character is downhill after that in terms of his relevance to the show.
And wow, then that's strong stuff.
I've said that before.
And I think you have, yeah.
It's almost like not only is that true, but he gets kicked in the ass, because basically you're saying that you're not even good enough to take command of the Enterprise under an emergency situation. We're going to give it to somebody else, and I just find that I mean, it's sad because Riker is capable and he's done it to himself. It's what you said at the beginning of this discussion. They don't understand his reasons, but his reasons are equally valid, and he has made peace with it. But everybody else around him, well, people up there don't understand and unfairly malign him, and I love the scene where this guy has to come, like you said, eat crow, and ask him, and Riker even says, "Well, ask me."
Yeah,
and he's completely. And by the way, I don't know if you noticed what he's reading. I think he's reading Shakespeare, right?
I didn't notice that. That's a really good thing to. Oh, the book that he's reading, the book that Jellicoe, he's like, tells Picard to take at the end of the, here's your book. Get your goddamn book out of my office. We didn't talk about it during our discussion. I guess that's one point that didn't come up from my notes, was Jellicoe's ready room was so different with the trees. He had plants everywhere.
Yeah, because he's an outdoorsman.
He's an outdoorsman, so I thought that was interesting too. I think that there was every reason why Jellicoe and Riker should actually love each other, like in terms of like their personality types and their backgrounds. It seems like they're both actually quite similar, and that's probably Jellicoe's fault here, is that he like maybe sees a little too much of himself in Riker, and yeah, exactly. And so yeah,
Jellicoe, it's kind of the relationship might have become something like almost like Riker had his father on the ship, and it might have recalled. I mean, not that this ever was I mean, not Patrick Stewart was never going to leave the show, but
Right.
but in this imagined alternate show, that could have happened.
Fascinating indeed. Well, I really enjoyed our discussion, Doctor.
I
Uh,
did it.
I think we did it in a new way. Part 1 and part 2 all combined into one, so that was pretty cool. And I look forward to more more discussions. Next up, we are going to. What is the next episode? Let's take a look here. It's Ship in a Bottle. Do you remember that one?
No.
Moriarty returns.
Oh, okay.
So it's the wrap up, the conclusion to the Moriarty story. So that's our next discussion. Hope to see you here, audience. Hope to see you, Doctor, if you're around.
Yeah, I love game.
Yeah. And anything to promote out there? Anything going on that we should know about?
No.
No comic conventions, no toy fairs, nothing in your world? Nothing going on at the Coral Gables Art Cinema? Doctor, you're so unprepared.
I don't promote anything.
You can. You're supposed. We used to back in the day, unsolicited promotions. Remember?
I never. What did I ever promote?
Was when I lived in Seattle. I would be like, "Oh, this is going on in Seattle," and you'd be like, "Oh, this is going on over here."
I don't remember that at all.
All right, I'll have to find. It could be in my mind.
Any video. Unless there is something.
Do you realize, Doctor, that there's over at least something like 160 Starfleet Boy episodes, and you're in at least 80 or 90 of those? I reckon. It's crazy how much video. If the future if posterity wanted to, they could recreate digital Max Headroom like versions of us for entertainment purposes. I'm sure there's enough we've said enough words into the digital verse to be able to be imitated at this point for sure. Soul. What's that?
Our souls.
No, there might be professional actors behind the robot, the animated versions of us, the Max Headroom versions of us, approximating our personalities. But hey, if they're as good as Ronnie Cox, I'm all for it.
Okay, David Warner can play me then.
Oh yes. And on that note, live long and prosper, and we'll see you next time, sir.
All right.